Good day everyone. So who's going to win, a C6 R5 Triple Crown Yelan or just a C1 Collei? Well, that's not really the point of a video. The point is to sort of look at how far does Triple Hydro and a sort of Nilou team with Nahida carry you versus just 2 Hydro, 2 sort of Dendro. Now, of course, this video is not about speed running, it's all just pure entertainment, but the whole point is to sort of compare these two teams, and obviously on your left is the Yelan team, and on your right is the sort of Collei team. I will show the full unedited runs towards the end, so don't worry about that. But as you can see, I'm just sort of curious to see what the difference is going to be. How much is the AoE versus its single target sort of going to matter? And in any case, here are the results. Obviously the in-game clock is very inaccurate, so we're going to just use some frame counting software. One thing I'll note is that Yelan's team is a bit more consistent. It's a lot easier to get between a 22 to 23 second threshold, whereas for the Collei team it's more likely to get a 23, 24, 25 second sort of clear. For me, the big thing here is that the Yelan team sort of guns down the wolves a bit quicker than the Collei team, but I mean that's just sort of to be sort of expected, and the rest of the remarks you can obviously read. So how does this sort of look on the second chamber? So arguably this is where things should be at their most equal, because it's just sort of like heavy AoE. But the one thing that you'll do need to note is that the enemies themselves have like a very large like HP pool and so on. And I do think that in terms of the run, if it was sort of played perfectly and the execution and timing had been a bit more perfect, then honestly I think the difference would not have been that big. I must just sort of note that a C6 Yelan has a big AoE sort of Hydro that you can hit. She's got 5 instances that you can hit with a Breakthrough Bob. I think it's 5 instances. I don't think there's an ICD, but in any case, let's go on to the final floor. So yeah, obviously single target. Yelan's team is gonna win by a big margin. We know that, but honestly, from my perspective, the AoE is really favorable for the Collei teams. I do think that my sort of a rough conclusion on all of this would be that if you're going to do sort of an AoE, you definitely want sort of Collei, and you definitely want a full sort of triple EM build with Kokomi. And obviously in the single target sort of team, you can then sort of use Yelan. Speaking of results, you can obviously clearly see the differences here. Once again, none of these teams are even near the speedrunning sort of records. If you wanted to do speedrunning, and this is just a thumbs up on my part, I do think you'd probably want to replace Collei with Technery, and in my Nilou is like C3 with an R1 weapon, so obviously not the full Nilou, and you can probably like do better. But from my perspective, the big difference between the two teams is just, well, yeah, they do as advertised. The one is pretty strong in single target, and in an AoE they're pretty much evenly matched. I do not think in an AoE you'll get as good results with a C0 Yelan. So obviously I think at the C0 F2P level, Collei is still going to be better. As for the concept of triple Hydro with sort of Nahida and so on, yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. It's very tricky to evaluate. And I do think that apart from the obvious things, there are quite a lot of subtleties that you need to be aware of, and I think the biggest one is probably your builds. So for instance, in the background we're running Kokomi with a sort of triple EM build. Obviously I've got Kokomi Constellation, so that Constellation 2 really sort of helping out quite a lot, but at a C0 level you probably want to at least have your Kokomi's healing bonus circlet if you're running Yelan. And I think in theory it goes that if you've got triple Hydro, obviously you want your Hydro to overpower your Dendro application, and hence when Nahida is your on-field driver, she's the one triggering the bountiful cause, and hence what you then want is more healing on your jellyfish to sort of keep her alive, not just from the cores exploding, but also perhaps from like environmental damage or the enemy sort of knocking you around or something like that. So there is a couple of changes that you'll make. Perhaps in a sort of triple Hydro team you'll run more traditional Kokomi, although I'm not fully convinced. I do think there might still be scope for a bit of EM on it. The other thing that I do think people need to be aware of is that if you go for constellations on Nahida and you get C6, then obviously Karmic Oblivion gives you those additional instances of Dendro that you can apply, and in a certain sense you might even overtake the, especially if Nahida's on field, your Dendro application might completely overtake even a triple Hydra team. And I think that's in a certain sense what's happening here. And then what happens is that Yelan is probably the one then triggering some of the hyper blooms and so on. Oh, yeah, by the way, here in the background, this is one cool little technique. You purposely wait for the enemies to sort of burgeon the first wave so that you can trigger more like bountiful cores. It's a little subtlety that you want to sort of point that out there. But yeah, so I think one has to be so careful in these teams about who has bloom ownership, who does what, and how you're sort of going to layer your abilities, and very often in the battlefield on the Spiral Abyss, how you're going to position to get it out. There's so many subtleties that I just cannot cover in this video, but I just do want to sort of point out that, yeah, Triple Hydro or the sort of Collei team at a C0 level, both are valid, although I would personally prefer the Collei team, but that's just me. At a C0 level, of course. Alright guys, thanks for watching.